Helen Pluckrose.
Hello,
Welcome
Peter Boghossian.
to Conversations with Peter Boghossian. How is the island over there, Helen?
Oh,
Ahoy. How is it?
No,
How is the island?
behave,
It's still floating.
It's still there. We haven't sunk yet. No, we're doing just fine without abrasive colonials coming over and asking people impertinent questions.
Excellent. I can see you want me back again. And what about those people with those big black hats, Helen, walking around? That your elders. What about them? You know those people?
Yeah, you're speaking about the doormen at hotels with the top hats, aren't you? They were rather confused when you referred to them as tribal elders, and I have to really just keep following you around, saying, "I'm so sorry, he's American."
Well, I just want to respect your people, and I would never try on one of those hats, Ellen, because cultural appropriation. I would never want to.
If you wanted to respect our people,
yes,
you would not put ice in your tea in a restaurant. That waiter is probably still receiving therapy.
I know, and I should also try not to pet your people whenever I see them. They're just so cute to me, so cute, cuddly, all of them. just pet them all. Oh, little island person. Oh.
I'm very glad people are seeing this, because I keep trying to tell them what it is I have to put up with, and I just don't think they see the scale of it.
Oh, okay. Listen, Helen. We have serious matters to discuss. We have to bring it back to continent level serious now, Helen. Now you've written another book, but before we talk about that book, let's talk about Cynical Theories. I think it's I can't remember what the publisher told me a while ago. I think it's at 600,000 copies. That's incredible. Across all platforms.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many it was. I saw in the first year, I think just in the US, 155. So then, yeah, with everything else, yeah.
And how many languages is it in now?
I don't know exactly. I seem to remember at one point Kurt telling me it was 15, and then updating after that. So I think it's a lot. Well, a lot too.
Yeah, that's really excellent. And I remember it was kept off the New York Times bestseller list. And I've said that repeatedly, but I just think that a lot of people think that the New York Times bestseller list is just like a number. It's just a simple metric, and you just pull the number and that's what it is. But that's actually not what it is. They kept off Peterson's book. They kept up other books. So has your thinking evolved since Cynical Theories? But before we do that, can you nutshell what were you trying to do with Cynical Theories when you published that? It was 2019, right?
Yeah, I was trying to show how postmodern concepts of knowledge, power, and language, in which we are to understand that knowledge is socially constructed by the people who are powerful in society, typically straight white men, in order to serve their own interests. They then make that knowledge legitimate, and then everybody speaks according to that legitimized knowledge, and that perpetuates things like white supremacy, patriarchy, imperialism, transphobia, homophobia, etc. So we need to then address the language, the discourses.
Right.
And so I wanted to show that so many of the ideas that we're seeing now, which really sort of mystify people who believe that humans can actually talk to each other and exchange ideas and evaluate ideas for themselves, I wanted to show how this is tracing back. So I went backwards, really, started with the theories we're seeing now. And because I studied postmodernism in another context in university as well, just traced the citations back. And the trail is very clear. I mean, Foucault is standing out right at the top of most cited people. And that's because that's where most citations lead.
Yeah, I just mentioned that. Just mentioned that in a podcast yesterday. So then you went from Cynical Theories, and you've been writing about liberalism. There's so much confusion about liberalism and authoritarianism. Let's see if we can clear some of that up. Would you please, for us? How do you define liberalism?
Okay, but at its most simple, the overarching principle of liberalism is that we let people believe, speak, and live as they see fit, provided it does no harm to anyone else, nor prevents them from doing the same. So that's John Stuart Mill's harm principle. And that essentially comes down to the principle of anti-authoritarianism. I sometimes find with people who don't like the word liberal because they associate it with other things in their particular tradition. If I say anti-authoritarian, that is something that they will agree that they can commit to. On another level, sort of philosophical liberalism can be a disposition, a broader set of principles, which takes that very this idea of live and let live, essentially, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and draws from it a lot of other ideas like democratic institutions and the free of exchange of ideas as a way of producing knowledge. The idea that there should be no barriers preventing anybody from accessing everything. All these ideas are drawn from that liberal tradition.
So what we see now is competing forms of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Right. We see much critical social justice is the attempt at the imposition of certain conclusions upon that people have to either believe or pretend to believe. Have you noticed that in the anti-woke space or on the right, there is an emerging kind of authoritarianism in response to or as a backlash to critical social justice?
I have certainly noticed this, yeah, and this is what I've been addressing quite a lot as well, because of course there has always been authoritarianism on the right, but what we're seeing now as well is a kind of I call it reactive overcompensation. Because just to take one example, so racism has always been a form of white identity politics. This isn't new. Typical racism, say in an American context, is a form of white identity politics. That right. We made significant progress on a consensus that was both stupid and unethical. And then when we had so many of the critical theorists of race in particular are constantly linking their own theories with black people or brown people, then we had this kind of reaction to the theories, but which were actually hitting black and brown people who may or may not subscribe to those theories. So that's the authoritarianism that's kind of come back, because people possibly who are already inclined to hold racist ideas can then present them as an anti-woke position, as criticizing an ideology, when actually, there was one example, a black man doing a difficult stunt on a ski slope, and he fell, and somebody put diversity on the slopes. Now, this man was doing absolutely nothing that was at all unethical, at all culturally related. He was just doing a stunt which went wrong. But because she could say diversity, she was kind of implying that, he had no place there. And she was using that language to imply that she was criticizing a certain DEI ideology rather than a human being who was just skiing.
Yeah, it's utterly remarkable to me how there are just these pernicious, dangerous, divisive elements of society, and they don't have anything to do with, well, I would argue, I don't know, maybe we disagree on this. I don't think that these are unique features of either the right or the left. I think that they all pick these up and manifest over time in different ways. And I do agree with you that the word liberal is fraught with, interpretive bias. Like in Australia, there's the Liberal Party that's anything but liberal, and the American liberals, the way that, and then there's classical liberals. Where would you fit classical? I've always considered myself a classical liberal. How would you define classical liberal, and where does it fit into the broad scheme of liberalism?
Well, I think in common usage, people will often use the term classical liberal to speak to the whole sort of realm of thought, to say a traditional liberal, not a left-wing person as often used in America. So they're talking about a basic liberal, but really in the the way that liberal philosophies work, and the way this divides up. Classical liberals typically have a much stronger focus on the economic axis. They are often more sort of centre right than centre left in that realm, and so they've got, and I think that would be the main difference. That's why I sometimes people call me a classical liberal, and I say that's not right, because economically I am more on the left, whereas the classical liberals, you in that sense, you're more likely to hear a lot of defence of small governments, markets, and I'm not really there with that.
What about maybe classical versus New Deal versus progressive versus communist? Any thoughts on those?
Well, there's certainly a lot of
that's big
different.
Big question. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, and I mean, a classical liberal and a communist. The only link really between them is that they're drawing on the Marxist tradition, which was a direct opposition to what he called the liberal economics of Adam Smith. So that's an opposition. And I think progressives can have a lot of meanings as well. I think liberalism in itself is progressive, because we're always seeking to reform things. But of course, people understand progressive now mostly, and I think we'll have to accept that, mostly as a sort of identity focused, always looking to push on in ways that may not actually be progress.
Yeah. So does liberalism want everyone to be equal the same way that communism wants everyone to be equal?
Well, no, because we've got the concept of meritocracy, of course, which is central to liberal philosophy. The idea there is that we remove all barriers from people, so that they can then rise on their own merits. Now, people often think that when somebody says, I believe in meritocracy, they mean that we think we already have one. That isn't implied at all. The aim for meritocracy may well involve still removing certain barriers, and liberals will disagree on which barriers still need to be removed. Libertarians really saying the most basic of things: just make everyone equal under the law, and then let them sort themselves out. Whereas other people like me will say, well, no, we need to reform. These schools are terrible, and they're not. That this community is not getting a fair chance at anything, because they haven't got a chance of a good school. So we need to fix that.
Okay, so this is what I don't understand. Maybe you're not the right person to ask, because you're not a libertarian. I have broad libertarian sympathies in terms of like balanced budgets, fiscal responsibility, and then liberalism, like let people do whatever they want as long as it doesn't hurt themselves. But what I don't understand is, doesn't that, and again, if you're the wrong person to ask, apologies, but isn't the weakness in that model or that way of viewing the world and fairness that it doesn't inject equal opportunity into the system? So we need some kind of a governing body to make sure that there's equal schools, or like, kids have lunches, or people who are, I have a very good friend of mine whose son has severe autism, like crazy severe autism. I was just sleeping in his house the other night, and it's just him and his wife. And it seems to me that we need some mechanisms and control in the state to help people like this.
I would agree. Yeah. I think so. Some of the arguments that we seen coming from sort of Black libertarians, Black conservatives, but who are against this idea. I don't want to. It was one quote that I saw from Glenn Lowry, for example, in which he was talking about.
His book is excellent, by the way. I'm like on the last chapter. It's excellent. Yeah.
He was talking about, feeling genuinely an affront to his dignity when people are trying too much to, in his view, to sort of equalize opportunities or take action for sort of African American communities. He described sort of really feeling like that was really underestimating Black people and was quite an insult. And I don't want to misrepresent him, because I'm kind of paraphrasing what I got from that. And I spoke in the same way about that when people speak that way about women. You need to be quiet so that women get a chance to speak. Shut up, I can speak. So I get that. And Shelby Steele, of course, he's very much against anything like, he thinks people need to rise on their own merits. And I disagree with Steele on that. I think he puts too much responsibility on the Black individual, whereas some of the critical social justice people put too much responsibility on society, and finding that balance where we are actually detecting genuine disadvantages that are happening. That there are crap schools here. There's overcrowding in houses. People aren't getting a chance to study. They can't afford laptops or the internet. These are big problems. And I would say, as a left liberal, that they are ones that we need to address if we actually are going to have a meritocracy. And it needn't be identity based at all. If we say, for example, that any community which doesn't have access to good schools, which is economically deprived, we need to aim resources there. Now, in some places, they may well be Black communities because of the history of Jim Crow and the way things have got separated out. And in other cases, they might not be. So in the UK, for example, the two sort of the poorest areas where there are also more trouble with violence and crime and unemployment are overwhelmingly white. There's almost no Black people there. So we can make that kind of thing. These are the areas we need to target without actually going through an identity politics route. And people tend to respond better to that. I find everybody, if you're saying to them, we need to put resources here because this is where resources are lacked, sense of fairness comes in. If you say we need to put resources here because this group is historically marginalized or something, then there's a sense of, is this really fair? Because there are very poor white people as well and very rich Black people as well. And so that doesn't seem to work quite as well intuitively with people who have that kind of sense of fairness.
I think that's right. I think that people do intuitively understand fairness. I think Rawls was great. Rawls, the older I get, he's become one of my favorite things, certainly one of my favorite top 5 contemporary thinkers. So I'm thinking about this idea of fairness, and there just seems to be a hierarchy of bad ideas, with the peak, in the realm of this conversation, with one of the worst ideas at the top being equity. Explain equity to us, please.
The equity, because I've been helping people write their DEI policies, so that there is a reasonable approach to equity, and maybe we've all seen that cartoon in which people standing on boxes, and the idea is that equality is treating everybody exactly the same, whereas equity is providing people with what they need. And so in some senses this makes perfect sense. If we give every student the equal right to access a classroom via the stairs, and we don't let anybody use the lift, this is not providing equal opportunity to those students who are wheelchair users. So in this sense, this is where we do need to have an understanding that in some cases, special accommodations need to be made for some people just to give them equal access to things. But then others are taking the idea of equity and mixing it up with all kinds of poor analyses of disparities, and sort of evaluating companies, for example, on which level of what races and sexes they have in which positions, and assuming that it must be a racism or a sexism problem, and then trying to even that up in ways that, even if it were actually ethical, generally tends to end up benefiting middle class racial minorities and women who would have done well anyway. And that's the I think the concept that people don't that people quite rightly think isn't an ethical way of going about things.
Okay, so let's drill down this concept of equity. Reed, put up the box cartoon again, please. I tell you a funny story about Reed. Some woman in said that Reed's life is worth 5 anthills when we were in, and it's not even worth 2 giraffes. It's worth 1. Reed's life is equal to 1 giraffe. We have the video of that, Helen.
I have no idea what you're talking about. This is not an uncommon experience.
That's okay. It's okay to get that. But anyway, so how would you? So there's the equality equity thing. So
yeah,
like, most people see this and like, oh, geez, equity must be a good thing. What, like, how would you explain to somebody in a tractor in, I don't know, a farmer somewhere with like, with no education, not that farmers don't have education, how would you just explain this to somebody who's not immersed in it? Like looking at that, keep that up there, Reed. Like, what is the problem with that?
I mean, obviously they've chosen an example there where there isn't a problem with that. There's a physical difference there that needs to be evened up. But where it is a problem is when that kind of analysis hasn't been done. We can see quite clearly that these 3 people have different needs. Nobody is disadvantaged by reshuffling them. Of course, this appeals to sense of fairness. But if we looked at so I'm using a UK example, there was a drive recently to get more women and people of racial minority into the RAF. And while it denied that it was discriminating, it did look from people analysing it, said it did seem as though quite clearly they were. And the thing that had happened here, I think, where that wasn't, if they were really not taking on white men and only taking on women and black and brown men, the problem there, of course, is that a lot of the most proficient, the best people aren't going to get in. It's also making a lot of assumptions that aren't substantiated. We know that men and women have different interests on average. It is quite possible, if not probable, that more people who want to join the military forces are men than women. If there's an imbalance there, it doesn't necessarily indicate that there's a problem. It might be, and that should certainly be looked into, but it does not necessarily indicate that. So do the research, don't be lazy about it and try and just even it up. And then looking at people of racial minority, is there a problem are they having a lack of access to it, or are there other issues? And if we look sort of at the demographics, we find that people do go into different jobs in different numbers. For example, if you're an Indian in Britain, you're 4 times more likely to be a doctor than the rest of the population. This isn't a product of white supremacy. Nobody is rounding up Indian Brits and forcing them into medical school. It's medicine is held in particularly high esteem by Indian culture. So there might be something that is discouraging black and brown Brits, but we don't know that. What they're doing there is lazy, because they're not surveying the population to see who wants to join the RAF and what barriers are in there. They're just trying to even it up, with the effect that some very good people who could have joined the RAF won't be. And no problems are actually solved. No upward mobility is actually achieved, because they've just gone with discrimination must be at the root of this, rather than looking properly at the multivariate causes of disparities.
Okay, so there's a lot in there, and I want to touch on the biological aspect in a moment. I don't mean to muddy the conversation, but I do want to add one more word that I think will help as we navigate this terrain. Diversity. It's a word that we hear. In fact, it's the key. It's the first word in the DEI, or DI, however you want to say it, initiative. What is the definition of diversity? It's a ubiquitous word. We see it just everywhere. What do people mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, sort of typically it means having a variation of whatever. So diversity is kind of neutral on its own. when it's used in a critical social justice sense, it is a bit of a red herring, because we will often find then that that what they are seeking is people with the same ideas, a uniformity of ideas, but with different identities. So what the liberal tradition in particular has always argued for is viewpoint diversity, because this is understood to be how we access knowledge, because people have different biases. We all can see the problem in other people's arguments and not our own. So bringing together these different ideas, viewpoint diversity is very valuable. Is diversity of identity valuable in itself? Maybe or maybe not. If there isn't a diversity of identity, then there may be a problem that you need to investigate. But in itself, diversity is much more of a complicated thing. So why is there?
Okay.
But why again?
So I'm going to interlace these ideas in a moment, but I want to pick up on something you said. Why would a lack of diversity of identity be a problem with cardiac surgeons?
Okay, so still manning this completely, but of course you're talking about surgeons. So if we're talking about people who don't actually have to communicate with other people, it's difficult to see how there could be a problem in other fields of medicine. Of course, having a variety of people who have the same first language, or who know the same sort of cultural ways of speaking about things, it can be very valuable in my job in care work. It can be.
Let me pause you there. So I want to go back to the surgeon thing, but
yeah,
is there data showing that if someone speaks the first language as someone else, those health outcomes are better? I would be extraordinarily surprised if that was the case. I wouldn't be shocked, but I'd be quite surprised if that were the case. I mean, I'm thinking yeah, go ahead.
I don't know. I responded to Bernie Sanders, who was referencing a study, and I didn't get to see the study, in which he said that there was a difference. Other people chimed in to tell me about the methodological flaws of that study. Then somebody else sent me a letter from a message from a doctor whom he'd actually asked about this, and he was saying, yes, there's a level of cultural competence here. And he was actually an Asian doctor working in the UK, and he said if the English say I'm ill, it means that they're quite ill. If the Scottish say I'm ill, it means that they're close to death. So knowing this, and he was obviously generalizing there, but knowing the difference between the way people speak could be valuable. Is there reliable data on the extent to which it helps? I'd have to say that one I don't know, because I did not look into it and much further than that.
I don't know either. Okay, so getting back to these identity markers, like, so if you're a heart surgeon, why does your identity matter at all? I can't imagine. I mean, one of my doctors is Asian. My primary doctor is Asian. He's a gay Asian man. That seems completely irrelevant than if he had any other identity markers. He's actually from China.
I think in cases like that, when we're looking at somebody who is operating on hearts, then it's this is there are verifiably better and worse ways to do heart surgeries, better and worse surgeons, and this isn't going to tie into race.
Okay, so why again? I'm just kind of picking up on something. So, like, why does how someone identifies? Let's say that they're a math teacher. Now, I already can see the objection coming from 1,000 miles away, because when I was a graduate student or an undergraduate, I had people I literally could not understand, but 50% of what they're saying. So assuming that somebody is linguistically competent and you can understand them, why would any of their identity markers matter? Like, I'm just trying to figure out why identity markers would matter at all.
I would argue that it doesn't, with issues that really don't change. The sort of the Arabic numerals that we use here work just as well here as they did in the countries in which they were invented. There really isn't, it's not that Europe at that time was doing a really weird thing with trying to count with sevens over 20s, and it was an absolute disaster. It was much worse way of doing things, and this was a European way of doing things, and that was an Arab way of doing things, but one of them was demonstrably better. So that is the way that was adopted and has been around the world. There isn't any this idea that different groups have different knowledges in that kind of way, in the scientific, in the mathematical way. I see absolutely no evidence of that.
Yeah, I don't understand. 1,000 repetitions equals a truth. I don't understand, and I remember asking people this early in like 2012, 2011, 2013, and they looked at me incredulously. And then even worse than that, why is diversity our strength? I'd really like someone to tell me that.
Well, I think it depends on the context in which you're saying that. Again, a diversity of ideas is, and a diversity of cultures certainly can be, that the British would starve to death or just really be doomed if we had to rely on our own cooking, for example. But other than these very sort of artistic, cultural sort of benefits that we can have from having a range of people, and just being interested in different cultures. Obviously, that is something. I am a fan of multiculturalism. Living in London, I find it. I very much like being able to wander through a Chinese area, then find myself in a Caribbean area, then an Italian area. So I like that. But why is it a strength just as a mantra? In order to justify getting people with different identities in, it's making essentialist assumptions about the people with those identities anyway. Yes. Oh, good, you're a black woman, you will think like this, so we want you in here. Well, no, but you don't know much at all about this woman. So I often, when that mantra is used, it's not used in a way that I think is sort of grounded in any sort of argument that really seems to be justifiable.
Okay, so I want to drill down on this. We have super chat, but I want to drill down on this because this is so important to me. This has been driving me to the point of utter madness. So this blanket statement, and I understand that our brains work like this, like diversity is our strength, and everybody gets behind it, and all the midwits start cheering, yes, diversity is our strength, diversity is our strength. There's so much. We could have an hour conversation on just this, and I want to drill down on this. I also want to get to the implicit bias chapter in your book, if that's okay, and a few other things. Douglas Murray, our mutual friend Douglas Murray, talks about how the idea of diversity in cuisine is kind of like the lowest hanging fruit. It's like this is something that people use that they can just point to. But when I talked to Eric Kaufman, he said that, and I was just so struck by this, I've been thinking about this, not all countries contribute equally to the Treasury, to the UK Treasury. So some people, some cultures, people from certain countries take more, and some put more in. Somalis take more, and I think Indians, when there's probably a cross-cultural thing across the pond. When we say Indians, it's usually like either Native Americans or East Indians. I mean, people from India are contributing more. And you gave the statistic about the number of doctors in the UK from India. So it just seems to me to say that diversity is our strength. It depends. It's such an idiotic statement. I mean, it's just it's so idiotic. I remember when I first encountered that a long time ago, or when it gained traction, I kept hearing it. And I went to at the former university where I used to teach, where you gave a talk, Helen. Well, we gave a bunch of talks there. I remember encountering these people at a seminar I went to, and I said, if diversity is our strength, why don't we hire someone who's mathematically illiterate and make them the chair of the math department? I mean, it's so stupid. But it just sounds good. So I guess the thing I've also been thinking about is, I wonder if this is an evolutionary adaptation, because if we don't tell diversity, if we don't, like, mimetically, that idea has gained strength unconsciously in people, because it's a way of an evolutionary adaptation to different people living together who have different cultures and look different, and etc. Again, I don't know that that's true. That's just a speculation. Okay, I want to relate the idea of diversity now back to the idea of equity. Can you relate those two concepts to each other?
So there's the idea that in order to have a diversity of identity, then we need to put into practice the policies of equity, to make sure that if a certain team has a few women or a few black people in it, then we need to get more women and black people in it in order for it to work well, which is not paying any attention to sort of individual skills. And so that's this whole sort of equity, diversity, and inclusion. The way it tends to hold together is that we need to be inclusive of a diverse range of identities, and in order to do that, we need to put these equitable practices into place. And of course, there is a very liberal approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, which understands them as being genuinely inclusive of a diverse range of people and ideas, and in ensuring that anybody who isn't currently having access to opportunities at which they could excel is enabled to get those opportunities. So it isn't that the critical social justice people believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and everybody else believes in homogeneity, exclusion, and inequality. That it's different approaches to understanding these ideas. And what I was thinking before, when you were saying diversity is our strength, we're also seeing at the moment, a lot in the UK, people who are essentially arguing homogeneity is our strength. And they are arguing that we would do better if everybody was white, Christian, and their family had been born in the UK forever. Now, this does not actually tally with history at all. And as I studied 1300, 1700 religious writing in England. And I can tell you that having everybody of the same colour, the same religion, doesn't actually make for a peaceful society. People will factionalize anyway. There are 45,000 denominations of Christianity now. And that's one set of ideas that really did police itself very strongly, because we're a disagreeable species. We will, if we got rid of people, everybody who was different in one way, what we would do then is make more divisions among the people who are left. Because
the tyranny of small differences. Freud talks about that.
Yeah, and because this fear of difference is in our brains, so it wouldn't matter. We can't actually change our externalities so that we no longer have insiders and outsiders or differences in the culture, because those differences are in our brain. If everybody thought almost exactly the same, we would still, that whole thing, sort of arguing about how many angels can dance on the pin of a needle, that is what we would do.
So, okay, now I'm thinking through this, and I'm also trying to be charitable to ideas that I find odious, and the most obstreperous of voices have forwarded these. So explain to me how prima facie diversity and equity do not undermine meritocracy.
Well, depending on whether if you're talking so people who believe that meritocracy is a good thing don't tend to believe that CSJ versions of diversity and equity are a good thing.
Right.
But the people who are promoting diversity and equity in that sense believe that meritocracy is largely a myth, and is set up to ensure the continued success of straight white men. So they don't work. They're not aiming for meritocracy,
Okay.
because they don't believe the concept works.
Okay. So I'm gonna put a pin in this conversation. I think I use that expression differently. I'm going to pause you in this conversation, and I'm going to suggest something to you.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are making those arguments don't actually believe that. And here's my evidence. Here's my evidence for that. And you tell me if my thinking is in error. If they believed that, then it would be, then you could hierarchically prioritize those values in a suite of values or a system of values. You just pluck those out and then rank order those. Diversity one, merit, maybe they would say meritocracy shouldn't even be in there. Who would they send their kid to, going back to the cardiac surgeon? You know, if their mother or father needs, and they love their mother or father, or their son actually works better when you could, when you go that way. But who would they rather send their kid to? A diverse hire, or someone who gained their position through meritocratic ends? I mean, I can't fathom anybody would say anything else than meritocracy. That would mean that it's verbal behavior and they don't believe it. If my thinking is in error, tell me.
I don't know. I don't think the system that you have there would work, certainly. But I think a lot of the critical social justice people do believe that the idea of meritocracy is so flawed that if we sort things out, people will even out anyway. So that there's a sort of fundamental opposition to competition, because it's seen as or to differing levels of ability as well. So that's something that comes up with you know, on a sort of wider scale than anything to do with identity. If we have a meritocracy, there will be people who succeed, and that means there will be people who are on the least successful. They are going to be people on the lower rung. If you are an ethical person, I think you then have to think about, well, how do we make sure that these people who are delivering our mail and stocking our shelves and doing all of these things have a decent standard of living, that they're keeping society running. But with I've diverged from your point, sorry, but I think if some people would I think argue to that suggestion that that there is no reason to think that meritocracy is actually what makes people better. The aim for meritocracy, that society is so screwed up by all these unconscious biases, by all these hidden disadvantages, that there is no reason to think that you can get a better surgeon, say, from a meritocratic society than by trying to even things up. Because the only reason that people could not have got to that higher position on their own is because of systems in society that are holding them down. So if they believe that unconditionally, then I think that they would then say that and genuinely not see a difference. Of course, we'd have to measure it. If somebody who made this argument does then it seem to favour a meritocratic approach in real life, then you can doubt their sincerity.
So, adjacent to this conversation, I see the people making these arguments, they seem to have a uniform psychological disposition. And that disposition is, well, first of all, that they seem to be, and I'm going to catch crazy grief for this in the comments, but it's true. They seem to be underaccomplished. They seem to not understand how much work it takes to succeed. They seem to be angry and lashing out, and they're lashing out at the system for their, now I understand this is a psychological play, and I'm not saying this deals with everyone, but by and large, I see this. I see these dispositional traits among the people who advocate these positions, and I also think that that's a reason that the people who advocate these positions don't want to engage in dialogue, discourse. I'm hesitant to say debate, but certainly debate. And I don't even mean by and large. I mean just uniformly. They think, and there are a number of reasons for that. But wouldn't it be much more honest to say, yes, that? Well, let me pause, because there are 1,000 ways we can go. We have a super chat waiting that's been on the back of my mind. Let's do the super chat read. Michael Beverly, Mexican money. Living in a narco state, it's more free, and I'm much happier than when I lived in Cali. I mostly live as an ANCAP volunteerist. What is that? At least practically, or am I deceived? Or perhaps I'm just a selfish. I'm not really sure I understand that comment. Is living in a narco state more free? I have absolutely no idea. I personally wouldn't want to live in any kind of anarchy. Although I find it interesting that people who advocate these CHAZ, these free enterprise zones, like, you would last 5 minutes in, like, I don't know, Syria or Somalia or someplace. Like, I mean, that's just like crazy to me. I see young women advocating this, like, abolish prisons, defund the police. I'm like, have you lost your mind? I'm sorry, I don't understand that comment. Do you?
I'm not sure I do, but I think I might be wrong, but I think I can get at the essence of it, a kind of just letting people sort themselves out, and not regulating them in any way. And I think, I can't remember which city or even which state it was in the US that had that took control of a large chunk of a city, and within about 3 days it had a warlord. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Was that when they set up barriers in and out of the system, and roadblocks and such? Was that Minneapolis? I can't remember where. Yeah, I remember that. But yeah.
We see what happens, and I would argue as well, which is something I think people rarely consider, is that we have actually had sort of libertarian, sort of really essential radical libertarian states for much of our evolutionary history. As hunter-gatherers, it has been a matter of people sorting themselves out. And Steven Pinker sort of shows in his Better Angels of Our Nature, at this point, when people were living like that, there was something like 40% of deaths from violence. So I would not want to have that kind of complete lack of any regulation because of this kind of might makes right thing. And obviously women are not going to do well in a society where there are no regulations, and whoever is the most powerful, often the most physically powerful, are going to take control of things.
Yeah. All right. So we could obviously plumb the depths of this for quite some time. I want to talk about something. So this is what is a constant source of amazement to me and a constant source of frustration to me. So it seems that we have people who have very strong moral impulses for things, and they're so convinced that their moral impulses are correct that they then try to discharge those moral impulses in the world, in systems. They then try to change rules and make laws, etc. And what they do is they then cherry pick their epistemic landscape for individual data points that supports the belief that they already hold. And then they write off other data points as anomalous or bullshit or whatever it is, or offensive, or not even worth giving the dignity of time for.
Yeah.
So one thing that I see over and over and over and over again, and I'm so happy you wrote about it in your book, is you wrote in chapter 3, implicit bias. And I constantly see that. And every time I've asked people questions about that, I get either a blank stare or studies that I've we've talked about that have been discredited. So I was wondering if you could give us a little tour of chapter 3 of your book, please, and pull up her title.
Yeah, so that was sort of looking at the way EDI programs are being set out, because when I was working with Counterweight, we were sort of dealing about 100 active cases a month, and then we had a Discord server with thousands of people in there. So we were hearing a lot of what was happening in the EDI thing, and then of course you can see the programs themselves. And then just last year, a lot of research has come out analysing the results of these kinds of programs that are really focused on those concepts of equity, diversity, and inclusion, which have got this underlying belief that we are all socially conditioned into holding white supremacist, patriarchal, imperialist views, and we can't help it. And that we have to acknowledge these biases, have them dug out of us, and then work to dismantle them. And a lot of them, because they're based overwhelmingly on the D'Angelo school of thought, particularly in the anti-racist area, where people have had to say things like, all white people are racist and I'm not the exception. The question is not did racism take place, but how did racism manifest in this situation? That's another D'Angeloism. Right. And so we see that in there. And when you read back through D'Angelo's sort of history of this, it seems to be very much based on her grandmother, a desperately poor Italian-American woman who must have been born about 100 years ago. And the ideas that she instilled in D'Angelo, which was, yes, we are so poor, we don't actually have anywhere to live, our clothes are dirty, our teeth are damaged, but at least we're not black. And so this was something that D'Angelo very honestly admitted to having internalized. But then she makes the assumption that everybody else has as well, even though we have actually all grown up in sort of very different environments with different kinds of values. And this is where a couple of the unconscious bias books that came out last year have been really, really good, because they have focused on the importance of universal biases, cognitive biases that we all have, like confirmation bias, affinity bias, and all of these kinds of cognitive flaws. They've also focused on individual biases that we all have. You can have this you go through life and you pick up biases and prejudices against people for entirely subjective reasons. So being aware of that, the example I gave in my book, one of them, is that at my school, the two mean girls were a pair of friends called Kelly. Now, when I meet a woman called Kelly, my instinct is to think that she's going to be horrible. Now, I have to think, undo that. That's nonsense. There's no reason to think that that's going to be the case. But these are the kinds of little individual biases. So being aware of those, and then there are cultural biases as well. But the critical social justice approach has focused very much on specific ones. So it will look, for example, and this is where I would recommend everyone to read Pamela Fuller, because she's the person who's taking a really broad approach to this. And so she has, and she's an empiricist, so she shows that darker skinned black women are less likely to progress to higher places than lighter skinned black women, but so too are shorter men and fatter women. And so this idea, what do we expect our leader to look like? He's not going to be a short man. He's not going to be a darker skinned black woman. He's not going to be fat. So we've got these things which certainly are in there. And I think anybody who suggests that we don't draw any biases from culture is being naive, because we can see how beliefs have changed from 50 years ago, from 100 years ago. From, it's not a coincidence that nearly everybody in Pakistan is Muslim, for example. So of course we are influenced by culture. But where D'Angelo et al. Go so wrong is that they seem to think only they can interrogate these ideas, only they can see through them. Whereas that the liberal mindset would say, no, we can all look at society, we can all evaluate the different range of ideas in them, and we can make arguments about which are better or worse, and make progress that way.
Yeah, that's why I like her work. So the way to think about this would be through this, the same way you think about anything else, through reason, evidence, and data, right? And you look at the data. Okay,
Yeah,
so
it's not looking good. The research that's come in at the end of 2023 is not looking good at all.
Okay, so I have a question, Helen. Perhaps you can help me. Reed's heard me ask this question. Oh, you okay, Helen? Don't die on me live stream.
I'm trying not to, but my hang on, if you just let me mute for a minute. There seems to be a problem with my.
Oh, Helen's muted. So I'm going to take Helen. I can't hear you muted, but that's okay. So if anybody has any questions and you want to throw them in the super chat, let us know while Helen readjusts. She's probably getting her tea that she's freshly microwaved. She taught me how to make tea, by the way. You put the milk and the sugar in a cup, and then you put it in the microwave, and then you make sure the tea bag is in there, the microwave, and then once tea bag's in the microwave, you just microwave the hell out of it for multiple minutes, and then you take it out and you put it over ice, and then you add a little more sugar and a little more milk, almond milk, and then we're good to go. That's how you make tea. Okay, we got Trade Bear for $9.99 while we wait for Helen. SJ Warriors are involved in a huge D&D game. Yeah, I know. Where they make the rules up as they go. They have found their little kingdoms where they have power picked on as kids. Now they mean girls with power. Yeah, and the whole D&D thing is terrible. What they've done. Oh, here's Helen. Helen's back again. So I'm going to get her to admit that's how you make tea. Let's see if I can do this. Yeah, they've also changing the racial demographics in D&D, by the way. And there's some good stuff. For those of you who don't know, I'm an avid D&D player. Reed has actually been playing D&D. Helen, are you ready to go?
Yes. Sorry about.
Is everything I said accurate there? Was everything I just said accurate? Just say yes, Helen.
No.
Just say yes. Just say yes, Helen.
Extremely unlikely.
Oh, you're a terrible person, Helen. Okay, well, that didn't work. All right. So so I have a question, something I've been thinking about. Maybe you can help me think through this. Reed's heard me ask this a million times. Why is it that some people are immune to this and other people are not? I want to pull up a tweet. Reed, could you pull up Naomi Wolf's tweet? I love the doctor thing there. Dr. Naomi Wolf. I support LGBT rights, but it is a really, really important point. It took me 7 years to understand what Rowling was trying to convey. And Reed, pull up what Rowling was trying to convey there. Like, click on it. When a trans-identified man stops sex offending at exactly the same rate as other men, as all available statistics show that they do, you might have a valid argument. In the meantime, women and girls who make up 88% of sexual assault victims need single sex spaces. Okay, Reed, go back to Naomi Wolf's thing. I just imagine that this took someone 7 years to figure out. Like, it just blows my mind. It just completely blows my mind. Like, we're mutilating children. People still think this is a great idea. Like, I don't understand. Like, I'm truly and sincerely trying to understand. How could people fall for something that is uniquely stupid? It is so fucking idiotic. There's no there there. There's nothing to it. It's just, I guess it's intelligible nonsense in a way. I mean, it's just so demonstrably, apodictically idiotic and stupid. I don't understand how some people, every disparity in outcome is, okay, you can take down. Thanks, Reed. Every disparity in outcome is due to systems. Everyone, like the candy, like all of them. And if you question that, you're a racist. Like, I just don't understand. Why is it that some people fell for this madness, just completely fell for it, and other people said, like, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Where's your evidence for this? Like, explain to me, if you feel comfortable explaining to me, why most people fell for this, and some people, like Shermer, never fell for it.
Well,
Why
I
some
think
people never fell for it? I never fell for it, but I don't think I'm particularly smart. Go ahead.
so. I think Michael Shermer in The Believing Brain sets out a good answer to this. He looks at the reasons that some people are more drawn to sort of faith-based things, whether it's religious ideology or conspiracy theories, or and I would put a lot of the critical social justice things in the realm of conspiracy theory type thinking, just as a category of thinking, and other people are more immune to it. So we see, for example, that people on the autistic spectrum are less likely to fall for sort of ideological things like religion, that they're sort of less likely statistically to find that faith-based thinking makes any sense to them, because they are very more likely to be focused on materiality, on systems, on evidence. So I think there's a very sort of biological basis that's going on there too. But what it looks like on the surface is, of course, a difference in epistemology. And for somebody like you, who is very much based on what is the evidence, what is the reason, it can be extremely difficult to even try to understand what people who have a much more sort of loose sort of theoretical philosophical gooiness that doesn't work at all, how they are logging into that. And then I've been having this ongoing argument with a woman who keeps insisting to me that everybody has their own truths, apart from you, apparently. We shouldn't criticize anybody's personal truth apart from yours and mine, obviously. So she, but the reasoning that she's doing, and I go through and I look at what she's saying, and I believe that she is genuine. I don't think she sees the flaws in the way that she's thinking. She has this feeling that this set of people are right and good and need to be protected, and this set of people are bad and wrong, and then she just leans in to the confirmation bias and the motivated reasoning. And I think this is an important difference between sort of empiricists, rationalists, liberals, is that we recognize that people have this tendency to confirmation bias and motivated reasoning, but we see it as a flaw. We try not to do it.
Right.
We try to set up systems to minimize it, while people who are more in the fundamentalist mindset, as Rausch puts it, out, the people who know the truth get to decide. And the people who are in the more sort of egalitarian, everybody has their own truth. They don't seem to be able to see it in that way. And I can, because I've studied postmodernism and the theories that come from it, because I find this way of thinking fascinating. So I would like to think that I do understand intellectually how people do it, but when talking to them, it's extremely frustrating, because I keep trying to think, but there isn't any evidence what you just said, that this reasoning process that you just used, it clearly doesn't work. Why don't you see that? Why don't you see that?
Okay, so then let me ask you this question. Let's accept by fiat that every single thing you said is true, and I'm fairly confident it is, but let's just accept that it is true. Then riddle me this, and if I'm wrong, I'll be the first one to say, why is it? I'm going to make a very specific prediction to you, and this is so unbelievably obvious to me, but yet it's a prediction that I think most people would disagree with. Why is it that the same people who have been lauding this utter insanity for over a decade are, as it falls into ill repute, are going to deny they ever believed it?
I think that is coming from this motivation to believe things, because the urge to believe has been, unambiguously rooted in in a sort of emotional wanting to be a good person, then they will step away
Agreed.
from that.
Okay.
That can be put to something else.
Okay. So, but I'm trying not to say but there is a but here and not an and. But everything you just said prior to that, how does that comport with, like, there must be some disposition in the people who are thinking that way that also encompasses the disposition that of gaslighting. Like there must those two things to me those two dispositions don't seem connected either psychologically or in actually in any arena. So like why, right?
I think if I'm following you correctly, it is why do we have these people who don't value evidence and reason so much as this set of ideals that they feel to be right? Why do they also kind of quite consistently engage in intellectually dishonest behavior to try and make their own point? Is that what you were?
Almost. Yeah. You expressed it almost better. I was inarticulate and I apologize. Why is it that those same people will deny they ever believe the things that they obviously believed?
Well, I think sometimes, obviously, people are just dishonest, and people sort of generally don't want to admit that they've been wrong. I'm interested in the psychology of this. That changing our mind, it's it triggers off the same parts in our brain that a physical danger does, and the fear of being seen to be wrong, because a lot of good evolutionary Trimble and McNamara, particularly the evolutionary psychology of it, it's been very costly as hunter-gatherers to be wrong. You can't afford to be wrong when it's about where the food is, where the water is, and so we have this fear that makes it really very difficult for people to say, I believe this and I was wrong, and now I accept the evidence for that and I believe that, even though any sort of reasonable person, any honest person would respect that much more than somebody sort of doubling down or trying to find a way to twist things so they weren't wrong in the first place.
Yeah, I just have a hard time, and I'm going to give you my second prediction. Those two unique dispositions, and I can't think of another word other than dispositions, have to be related in some way that I can't think of. But here's the other thing. So we're seeing increasingly some universities are repudiating DEI madness. And Reed, pull up that tweet of the university that funded the police with the DEI money. I predict to you that you won't see a single college president anywhere in the whole country say, you know what, we fell for this. We made a mistake. We're sorry. We're sorry for all the people who were harmed. We're sorry for all the wrong that we did. We just succumbed to something that was morally fashionable. That's my prediction to you. So why do you think, unless you think that there's going to be a kind of legal remedy, they wouldn't say that because of fear of being fear of being sued. Why won't administrators say, look, we were just held hostage to this idea. There was a moral panic. We made a mistake. We're sorry. We're wrong. We're getting rid of DEI. We're extirpating it. So this is what Rufo tweeted out. UNC's Board of Trustees has voted unanimously to abolish the university's DEI department and transfer all funds to campus police. It's not 2020 anymore. Defund DEI, refund the police is the winning slogan of the day. Okay, so that's good. Great. But what I would like to have seen is an admission. We had these policies. They hurt people. We're sorry. We were wrong. I predict you won't see that from a single university in the whole country, not a single president, because they're fucking cowards. Why do you think we won't see that? Or do you think maybe I'm wrong? We will see that.
I think it's very unlikely that we will see that, because in a structured organization like that, the whole there's so much pressure on optics. I think that intensifies that fear of being seen to be wrong. It's a kind of then a collective process, and I love the way Jonathan Haidt puts it in our natural link. We did not evolve to have an inner scientist; we evolved to have an inner lawyer, because that is what has helped us to survive, to find a way to make what we have just done right, to justify it, to rationalize it. And I think on an individual level, when one person is talking to another, or there's an individual thinker there, it can happen, and when it does, it's it's so remarkable that you just feel it's really praiseworthy. I had a woman today in my comments say she disagreed with me very strongly, and then when I'd responded, she came back and said, "Thank you. I think I've been seeing this in this way, but now that you've said that, I understand it better." And I just had to reply to her and say, "No, thank you. That the thing that you just did there, if we could do that, then all of us, and me included, obviously, have such a problem with doing that, and you just did it. So, and we can then see people who will do that, who will come forward and will say, I was wrong there, I've changed my mind because of this."
Right.
In an organization, it's so much harder.
Yeah. Okay. But I'm trying not to say but. Okay. And
I don't mind buts.
okay.
Do not respond to
that. No comment. Let's see. I think I'm understanding it better now. It did seem to me that Peter was setting Kara up for a gotcha, because that's so often what I see elsewhere. Yeah. Okay. So, and that's another conversation that I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. So if we want to, Americans by and large, and I think this is the same with Brits, I won't speak for your people, but we don't trust our institutions. The study after study, survey after survey, showing the only people Americans trust most are their own doctors. They just don't trust any institutions. They don't trust the academies. Wouldn't one way to restore, and I just said this with Matt Blinsky in a podcast yesterday, would be to fire plagiarists, but bracketing that for a moment. Wouldn't a way to help to reinstore trust in the institutions would be to say, we made a mistake, man. We're humans. You could frame it, Christian to err is human, whatever, figure of his development, whatever. We made a mistake. We're sorry. Yeah. We're screwed up. We will do our best not to let this happen again. But we did succumb to a moral panic, and we're going to put these measures in place, X, Y, Z, to make sure this doesn't happen again. Wouldn't that be a more first of all, it's obvious, like de facto, it's just more honest. But wouldn't that be a way wouldn't that go a long way to helping reinstore the public's trust in our institutions?
I think it would, and this is something I've argued repeatedly, usually in the context of somebody asking me, why are you, if you're on the left, why are you criticizing the left? And I think you are using bad psychology. And I use the example of if a terrorist incident happens, and people are getting extremely anxious about, say, Islamist terrorism. The people who, the Muslims who reformers, who come up and say, yes, there is a problem here, and we are addressing it, are much more likely to bring that fear down, to make people feel okay, so they're seeing it and they're on it, than the people who say, no, Islam is a religion of peace, and if you say anything different, then you're an Islamophobe. And of course, I think that psychology is so very wrong. I have always argued that the way to increase confidence in the left again, in a UK context, to make it electable again, is for those of us on the left to be seeing the problem and to be addressing it. But people seem to really instinctively disagree. No, we must focus on the problems with the right. You're not having solidarity. You're undermining your own side, and I think that's what we see in institutions. And I do think it's an error. I do think the best things universities, if they're going to come away from wokeness now, would do to restore trust is to say, we let ourselves be overtaken by an ideology which is not what universities are for. And here are the steps that we are making to make sure that this doesn't happen again. No.
Okay, so you're making the point for I couldn't possibly agree more, and the fact that they won't do that shows that they're irrevocably broken. They're broken. They're broken. They're irredeemable. They're utterly irredeemable, because that is such a simple thing to do, as is firing plagiarists, serial plagiarists. That's a really simple thing to do, but they won't do it. They won't take the most minimal steps to ensure.
I mean, this is the
trust.
same thing though as well, Pix. I've been focusing on employment for the last few years, particularly on businesses, and we're seeing the same thing there. And that's in my book as well. Companies that had committed to DEI programs, who admitted pledges, are backing away from it. They're withdrawing their pledges. They're changing their DEI programs. They're not saying, I'm really sorry, employees, that we inflicted this on you. I don't know what we were thinking, but they're seeing the research coming in. They're seeing that organizations which use this are actually sort of doing worse.
Okay, so I'm going to push back on that, because private companies can do whatever they want to do. I'm talking about publicly funded institutions. These are taxpayer funded institutions. They're beholden to the taxpayer. They're beholden to the citizens. A private company is just not held to the same set of rules. So it's incumbent upon people who work. I mean, they're elected at the, whether it's board of trustees or the president of, for example, Portland State. They're employed with taxpayer money. They're taxpayer institutions. So they're held to a different standard than a private institution. If a private institution doesn't want to apologize,
it's still not going to change the psychology. On a practical level, I think sort of tearing down things like universities is not actually going to achieve anything, because whatever comes up, again, it is very likely to go the same way. I mean, we see it in every area, with politicians, particularly people running the countries, the people most accountable to the people. They'll all have that mistakes were made, by you. Can you address that? They're not going to do that on a realistic level. That while I absolutely agree that yes, it would be fantastic if the heads of all the institutions, of the government, of everybody who has a responsibility to the people, would just transparently admit mistakes. It's unlikely that this is going to happen if we tear down the institutions that we have now, try to build new ones. I think the same problems with human nature are going to get enabled again. We're going to see the same problems. I think sometimes when, if people are backing away from things and trying to pretend they didn't do it in the first place, it's absolutely infuriating, especially when it's people like you and me and so many of our colleagues who have been pointing out the problem for a very long time. We just really want them to say, yes, okay, we see now.
Pointing out the problem, and the consequence of pointing out the problem is that they harass the shit out of us, like mercilessly. I mean, I don't want to make myself into a victim here, but it is so utterly infuriating to me, the levels of intellectual dishonesty, the levels of just grotesque. This is, and if I were a better person, well, actually, I won't go down that rabbit hole, because I don't want to. I find myself being enraged at it, and I especially find myself being enraged because the same people. I am telling you, mark my words. The same people who were promoting this and weaponizing these offices are going to deny they ever believed it. I'm telling you, mark my words. Okay, let's do the super chats. All right, Reed, let's pull some of these super chats up. $20, Casey Kuhn, in relation to Thomas. Thanks for supporting the channel. Do you know of any projects to build something new to slot in the religion-shaped hole that many agree exists and was adaptive until recently? I'd rather not leave that circuitry dormant to be taken over by opportunists.
Okay, well, I think Casey is kind of she's referencing the substitute hypothesis here, where
substitution.
Yeah. as religion declines, there's a gap there. It gets filled with other ideologies. I'm skeptical of that on a sort of empirical basis, because I think if it was that straightforward, then the last place we would expect wokeness to arises in the US, because you have sort of 69% of people who say religion is important to them, which is closer to Iran than the rest of the Anglosphere. We have something like 24% of people, but you have the highest degree of religiosity in the Anglosphere and the highest degree of wokeness. Okay, Canada is doing a weird thing on its own, but so I cannot see this substitute thing in the UK and in parts of Northern Europe. Religion has not really been a dominant feature for several generations, and we haven't seen wokeness arise. My hypothesis at the moment for why this has arisen, and I'm looking at the most dominant ones, queer theory and critical theories of race, which have arisen in a specifically American context, and why they look the way they do. I would say it's because there is that religious culture. There's a reason that people have been calling it the Great Awakening. And I think that same sort of cultural circuitry, that will to see the light, to bring other people into the light. So many of the features are the same. We had a talk about that as well, didn't we? Comparing the features. I think the reason wokeness looks like it did is because it arose in a strongly Christian culture. But that's not quite addressing what Casey was arguing. I'm asking, which I think was, how do we have meaning? Is there a lack of meaning? And I would say, from a liberal perspective, people have to kind of find what that is on its own, on their if people are finding meaning in Christianity, then wonderful, do that. Please don't institutionalize it or make anyone else do it. If they're finding it in another form of community, I find it in liberal philosophy. I quite like Norse mythology. People can find their own meaning. I don't think that society has to find a meaning for people and then try to get them to form around it. And I don't think historically that's even worked.
Great. Okay, let's give the next one. And I know we're a little over, so we'll work through these.
This is me giving 1,000-word answers.
Larry McFart. Wonderful name, Larry. Can you elaborate your thoughts on changing the definitions of words to then change a person's worldview by smuggling a new definition from COM terms?
Yeah.
All right. Can you do that in like 5 sentences, Helen?
Yes, I think I can. This is the idea that language constructs reality, isn't it? So you're putting a negative discourse out there. So we change the way people speak, and then they have to speak in different ways. J.K. Rowling made a critique of trans activism, and people just responded with trans women are women. She put one discourse out, they put another one in. This is we're having a really intense focus on the power of language at the moment, and that's why people are trying to change meanings to make it harder to express the dissenting beliefs.
Excellent. All right, Reed, last one. Mars. Oh, I love Mars. Mars is a student of jiu-jitsu and a buddy of mine. I've read a few, but would like to ask what are the best modern books to grasp classical liberalism? Modern books to grasp classical. Okay. Also, Helen puts up a lot of crap from nasty people online for our benefit. Thank you, Helen. You do. Your patience is unbelievable. I have no patience for these people at all. Well, like zero. I just don't find them to be good faith actors. I find them to be fundamentally dishonest.
I know your feelings on this from the times that you have texted me saying, Helen, you've been arguing for 4 hours with someone who's clearly dishonest and has 5 followers. Should you not get off Twitter? So yeah, I know.
Right.
I know your feelings on this, but yeah.
Any book recommendations?
Well, the classical liberalism, again, with that sort of economic thing, it's not my my main sphere. If you wanted to look for good sources for that, I would have a look on the Adam Smith Institute, which has a lot of good resources on sort of just the general liberal tradition. Modern books on that are Liberalism, the Evolution, Edmund Fawcett anyway, he looks at how the liberal tradition developed, how to be a liberal by Ian Dunt. He looks at, oh, actually he does, yes, he looks more at the classical liberal tradition and the egalitarian liberal tradition. I think he's very good. And my favorite, absolute favorite, because it's just a really a kind of general sort of intuitive sense of liberalism, is Adam Gopnik's A Thousand Small Sanities, and those are three that I think are really good. And of course, Kindly Inquisitors. It's always Kindly Inquisitors. I think is the thing. If you have not read that yet, after I've recommended everybody to 1,000 times, please read Kindly Inquisitors.
Yeah, it's a great book. The Constitution of Knowledge was good. John and I disagree on, if not a lot of things, most things actually. But in person, I find him to be lovely, and I love his work, even though we have very substantive disagreements. I'd also like to recommend and read, if you could pull up David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity, Chapter 3. I'm in love with that dude. He's just I had an amazing conversation with him, and he said a few things that I've been thinking about and can't stop thinking about. So The Beginning of Infinity.
A couple of people have recommended that to me recently. I must put that on my read list and move it up to the top.
Our dude's on his own level. He's like Nick Bostrom, who's also on his own level. Okay, Helen, where can people find you?
Helen Pluckrose on Substack. It's called the Overflowings of a Liberal Brain. That's where I have my most coherent thoughts. My pointless arguments are generally on Twitter on H Pluckrose.
Awesome. I'd love to do this again. I very much appreciated the conversation. If we do this again, if you're so kind to give some of your time, what I'd like to do is have you interrogate my beliefs about something you think I'm incorrect about.
Oh, and yes, good.
Okay.
Yeah, I have that in mind already.
Okay, great. We can do that. And then the other thing is, I'd like to either you or I, and we'll flip a coin or just decide who wants to do it, steel man the other's position.
Right. Okay. Well, let me make a suggestion to you. My next book that I'm writing now, it's called Reformers, Revolutionaries and Reactionaries. Has liberalism failed, or are we failing to be liberal? And I'm arguing for the reforming position over the revolutionary or the reactionary. And I feel that you, Peter Boghossian, are going too much into the revolutionary position. So I'd like to argue with you about that.
Excellent. I like that. Andrew Doyle and I are tossing around the idea of writing a book about, I think we're not going to do it because, but we're thinking about writing a book, but why free speech is bad, and then rebutting those arguments, like taking the best arguments that we can find, like genuinely steel manning them and then responding to them, because the people we want to have conversations with, they simply won't talk to us. All right, Helen, thank you.
Idea.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks, Helen, for your time. I appreciate it. Take care of the people on your island. Tell your family I said hello. And keep your camera on. Keep your thing on, because we've got to make sure it's all uploaded. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining the chat. Thanks to the amazing Helen Pluckrose. I love that woman. And I'll see everybody next time. And thanks to Reed, of course, whose life is worth less than 2 giraffes and approximately 5 anthills.
Thank you, Reed.
Thank you for watching. Everything we do is under the umbrella of the National Progress Alliance, nationalprogressalliance.org. It's a nonprofit, independent 501c3. Your generous donations keep us going and keep fueling content like this. So please help us out. Make a donation. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.